We begin this morning by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of Coast Salish people, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. And without our sponsors, events like this simply would not take place at the Surrey Board of Trade. Thank you so much to our community sponsor, the Association of Canadian Cannabis Retails, otherwise known as ACRES. Let's give them a great round of applause. They're just doing amazing work instigating change at the policy level, and thank you for your support on that too. Yes. Our marketing partner, another amazing partner on this file, Niche Canada. Let's give them a great round of applause. Our media sponsor, the Surrey Now Leader. Our venue sponsor, the Eagle Quest Golf Course. Let's give them a great round of applause. And if you're starting a business or need business support or need global connections, visit our Business and International Trade Center. And of course, we couldn't run that center without the sponsors of our law firm Faskin, or the accounting firm of PwC, and the Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan represented by S&F Benefits. Let's give them a great round of applause. I'd also like to welcome MLA from Surrey South, Stephanie Cadu. Thank you so much for attending. So ladies and gentlemen, I know many of you know what the Surrey Board of Trade does. We support business, bring business into the city. We're a not-for-profit organization. If you're not a member of the Surrey's business organization, you want to be. Because we are instigating change at the different levels of government. We are starting new businesses. We are making sure that Surrey is on the map internationally. We are a concierge of connections. Ladies and gentlemen, check out our newspaper, Surrey Business News. Check out our website, businessinsurrey.com. We are a very active organization, and it's just amazing the diversified portfolio of services that we offer, again, to our diversified industry base in Surrey. So ladies and gentlemen, as Canada's 5-month anniversary of cannabis legalization approaches, it's clear that it's been a bit of a bumpy ride. We've learned some new things, and we've learned that we need to reduce red tape as it relates to this $10 billion industry. The recent legalization of cannabis has put Canada in the spotlight. We are seen as a leader globally. In fact, the Surrey Board of Trade, thanks to the help with ACRES, the Nelson Chamber of Commerce, we've all collaborated on instigating change, reducing red tape at both the provincial and federal government levels as it relates to cannabis. And I do have some questions for our keynote speaker during the Q&A on, how the cannabis industry can positively impact the city's economy, a regional economy, the province's economy. This morning, our keynote speaker will speak in more detail on the impact of cannabis legalization on existing trade and industries. Does it create job creation and the opportunities for businesses at both the local and global scale, and discuss why, as a producer of cannabis, it has an even greater social responsibility than other corporate bodies. Our keynote speaker brings 16 years of political experience and a dedication to best practice in public health policy to his role as Vice President of Corporate and Social Responsibility at HEXO. And in fact, I moderated a panel last year in Kamloops, I believe it was, and Dr. Terry Lake was on that, and we were talking about cannabis legalization. Very entertaining panel. But he's done more than that during his tenure as a member of British Columbia's legislature from 2009 to 2017. He served as Minister of Environment, Minister of Health, where he was responsible for an $18 billion health budget. He also managed the implementation of the province's public health response to the fentanyl opioid crisis, earning him the Canadian Public Health Association National's Public Health Hero Award in May 2017. So congratulations. He's a past mayor of Kamloops. He's a veterinarian and former animal health instructor at Thompson Rivers University. And if you didn't hear yesterday, he's going to be on the campaign trail for our federal election this fall. As Vice President of Corporate and Social Responsibility at HEXO, he provides guidance and advice to ensure corporate policies and strategies uphold our reputation as a good corporate citizen in all areas, including public health and environmental sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. Terry Lake.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm glad you could read my writing that I wrote out for you there. It's a great pleasure to be with you all this morning. It's especially a great pleasure for me because I get to hang out with one of my favorite people in the whole world, Stephanie Cadieux. Steph and I sat next to each other in the legislature. Steph had the Minister of Children and Family Development. I had the Ministry of Health. So we had nothing but good news all the time. Hey, Steph? In QP, it was nothing. We were QP. Thanks for coming out, and thanks for your interest in this. If someone had asked me, 3 years ago, hey, Terry, you're going to be working in the cannabis industry, I would have said, are you crazy? Like, why would I have anything to do with cannabis? It was not something that I was familiar with. And I came around to the interesting world of cannabis through my daughter, Stephanie, who was doing her master's degree, now her PhD at the University of British Columbia in public and population health. And I went with her to a conference in New York on cannabis policy and cannabis science as she was presenting a paper there on behalf of the Center for Excellence for HIV/AIDS. And I was just so fascinated by this plant, the complexity of it, the effect it had on the body. As Anita said, I'm a veterinarian by training, so physiology, anatomy, how the body works is something that fascinates me. And to see that all mammals have this endocannabinoid system, these receptors in the body that react with molecules in the cannabis plant and all the effects, I just found it fascinating. And then the public policy challenge of moving from prohibition to legalization as a policy kind of wonkish guy, I found that truly fascinating as well. And so I got a call when I decided not to run again for provincial politics. I got a call from an old friend of mine from Kamloops, Adam Miron, who worked on my first mayor's campaign when he was in university. Well, now Adam was a co-founder of Hydropothecary, a medical cannabis company at the time, and he convinced me to come and work with him and his team. And at that time, we were about 80 people in the fall of 2017. We are now over 800 people in that company. So Adam is now CEO of, not a CEO, so he's a co-founder and chief brand officer at 35 years old of a company that's worth $2 billion. So life changes fast in this world, as Jeremy will tell you. Cannabis moves fast. So this is meant to be, I don't want to talk down to anyone, so it's hard to know what level of knowledge you have about cannabis, but this is more of a business sort of oriented presentation. I'm happy to chat with anyone who wants to talk more about sort of the science and the physiology of cannabis one-on-one afterwards. So, prohibition in this country started in 1923, and if you look back, there was hardly any discussion in Parliament about this. It just got added to a list of drugs that were all of a sudden prohibited. But some of you I can see are, around my age and can remember in the early 70s, the Ledane Commission was commissioned by the Liberal government of the day to look at all drugs. And they actually recommended that all drugs be decriminalized and have a different approach to the use of the concern about drug use, particularly marijuana. As we know, it didn't happen because politically it seemed like a bridge too far. But in 2000, medical use, compassion clubs were really becoming popular, particularly in British Columbia. People that found that cannabis really helped them with chronic conditions, particularly in which other approaches weren't helpful. And so the courts ruled in 2000 that a medical ban on cannabis was unconstitutional, to deprive people's right to medicine. So in 2001, the Liberal government allowed limited access for medical purposes. Those regulations were updated in 2013 that established licensed producers like Hydropothecary and Tilray and some of these other licensed producers across Canada. And then, of course, in 2015, Justin Trudeau's platform was to, one of the planks was to legalize cannabis. And so in 2018, we had the Cannabis Act that legalized adult use recreational cannabis. So why legalize? Well, Canadians are among the highest consumers of cannabis in the world. 21% of Canadians 15 to 19 use cannabis, 30% of those between the ages of 20 to 24. So, you know, to say something is illegal and yet you know people are using it and really no police resources were being used to enforce those laws, well, what sense does that make? And we knew that this was actually causing real issues for people. People were being criminalized because of the use of cannabis. In fact, half of all drug charges in 2015 were involving cannabis. And we know that having any kind of criminal record is a very negative impact on your financial health and your physical health. We know that organized crime, like organizations like the Hells Angels, were benefiting. Now, you know, this is hyped a lot. I mean, Hells Angels and other organized crime have been involved in the cannabis industry for a long time. But particularly in places like British Columbia, there were a lot of people in the cannabis industry that were independent entrepreneurs that were not connected to organized crime, that were out there in compassion clubs and, you know, as entrepreneurs, growing and selling and creating. And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be where we are today. So organized crime is a factor, but sometimes it's a little overstated. But certainly a lack of quality control, so you had issues of mold. This is a plant, and so you're going to have issues around the freshness of the plant, the quality of the plant. People were using a lot of pesticides, heavy metals sometimes were found, and so there was no quality control. So the two major goals of legalization: protect young people, eliminate criminal activity. How does it protect young people? Well, I asked my kids when they were in high school in Kamloops, what was easier to get, pot or booze? And they said, Dad, pot was way easier to get. Because booze, you had to go to an age-gated, regulated environment, whereas pot was sold everywhere. Okay, and lots of support for legalization of cannabis. So this was generally a popular platform commitment. So how big is the cannabis market? Well, you will hear all kinds of figures out there, and again, there's a lot of hype around this, but most analysts, whether it's the Parliamentary Budget Office or here CIBC, look across Canada and say this is probably right now, with the full array of cannabis products, is probably an $8 to $10 billion a year industry, which is significant. In fact, it is just behind wine, ahead of spirits, and a lot of people think it will overtake wine in terms of the impact on the economy. So we had the task force set up by Justin Trudeau to come up with the rules around the Cannabis Act, and they wanted to take a very public health approach. Differs quite a bit from the United States, where you have much more freedom to advertise, much more sort of fewer regulations, if you like. So we are a very highly regulated industry, minimum age of 18, but provinces could change that as they wanted to. And so most provinces equated the level of access to cannabis with that of alcohol. One exception is Quebec, where they started that way. They had a change of government, and now they're raising the age of cannabis access to 21. Meanwhile, you can get booze anywhere in Quebec at 18, and it seems quite if you want to take a public health approach, you think you would apply that to alcohol as well. Very restricted advertising and promotion, and so we can't, as companies, really talk about our product very much. We can do some interaction with the people who sell our product. We have to be careful what we put online. It is very, very restrictive. The THC and CBD content have to be on each of the containers, and a series of rotating warning messages are put there. So it's more like a tobacco model of advertising and promotion than a liquor model. And when you look at the relative harms of tobacco, alcohol, and cannabis, it is not really rational in that. many people would argue that we are way too loose on the regulation and promotion of alcohol, and that we really should squash all of these things a little bit closer together. But I'll leave that for social debate. So in October 17th, they allowed dried cannabis with no maximum THC content. Oils were allowed with a maximum of 10 milligrams per mil in capsules, for instance. And no real edibles or concentrates. I mentioned the strict packaging provisions, strict marketing provisions, and each province could determine the retail of distribution and retailing. So we see a mix of models across Canada. In some provinces like Quebec, it's strictly government distribution, strictly government retailing. Provinces like Saskatchewan, where everything is private, distribution and retailing, and then places like BC, where it's a combination of the Crown and private retailers. In October, we will have edibles and concentrates available, and so some regulations have been floated out there, and these will probably be proclaimed. These will limit the amount of THC per package. THC is the part of cannabis that gets you high. CBD doesn't get you high, but it reduces inflammation, for instance. It's thought to modulate mood. It reduces pain. It is the one that is used to control epilepsy in children, for instance. So these are two of the major cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. And so these are the two we talk about the most. THC gets you high, CBD doesn't get you high, and has all these other properties. And often the two working together have a different effect as well. And I must say, each one of us is different, so we all react differently. There won't be any sugars, colors, nicotine, or caffeine, no alcohol added to these edibles as well, or drinkables. They shouldn't be appealing to kids, and we can't make any health claims. We can't even say that this makes you feel uplifted. We really have to be very, very circumspect about how we talk about it. This is what the packaging has to have. So you see the THC sort of stop sign there to make sure people are aware it has a substance that can get you high. The warning labels, the very small amount of company name and product name, and the concentration of THC and CBD. So this is what it looks like in real life. You can see upper right-hand corner is the SQDC, the government retailer in Quebec. On the top left, you can see the different packaging. Very little differentiation of packaging and product. It's hard to tell one product from another, and that's a concern for companies like ours, where we're trying to differentiate our product. But then you look at the stores, bottom right, the outside, the bottom left, the inside of cannabis stores, and people describe it as Cheech and Chong meets the Apple store. These stores are extremely nice. The first store in British Columbia was in Kamloops, the government store there, and people were just amazed. They walked in, they thought they had literally walked into an Apple store. So how has it changed the use of cannabis legalization? Well, just before cannabis legalization, StatsCan has this cannabis hub. It's really interesting. You can Google it and see a lot of good information. So cannabis use in the past 3 months across Canada was about 15.2% just before legalization. In the last quarter that we just finished, so the first quarter of 2019, it's gone up to 17.5%. And what's interesting in these figures is that the biggest first-time users of cannabis are between the age of 45 and 65. We're seeing a lot of people, baby boomers, may have experimented with cannabis when they were young, or maybe they thought about it when they were young. Now they are starting to look at it, whether it's for health, wellness, or recreational use. It's quite amazing, the demographic walking into a cannabis retail store. In fact, in Edmonton, one of the owners of the Fire and Flower store told me 2 minibuses from a senior's home pulled up. They spent 2.5 hours in that store, and they all went out of their average purchase of about $150. It's amazing. The stigma is dropping. People talk about cannabis. When people ask me what I do, and I tell them I'm in the cannabis industry, 99% of the time, they're just fascinated and want to know more, and they want to know, of course, what stock to invest in. But the stigma about cannabis has dropped so quickly in Canada, and I think that's a very good thing, and I'll explain why in some ways. So this isn't an advertisement for my company. Well, it's kind of a a bit of an advertisement for my company, I guess, but I want to use Hexo as an industry example because, Canada is the first G7 country, first real Western industrialized country that has legalized cannabis on this scale. So I want to show you our company as a proxy for many different companies that are operating in Canada, starting to operate around the world. So it began in 2015 as a medical marijuana company called Hydropothecary, a 7,000 square foot greenhouse that used to grow flowers for nurseries and for sale, in stores. The number of patients across Canada was about 200,000. We had about 2,000 to 3,000 of those, mostly in Alberta. Very few in BC because there wasn't a lot of official medical users in BC because we had so much availability of gray market cannabis that people didn't go through the medical program as much as they did in other provinces. So our company saw this legalization of adult use coming. Our CEO, another 35-year-old wonderkind, raised all this capital. We had 50 employees in 2016, over 800 today. Our growing space has increased from 7,000 square feet to 1.8 million square feet. So if you talk about the impact on a community, I'll show you the impact on our community. This is an older slide now. The existing facilities are 310,000 square feet. That was about a year ago. We've now opened and are pulling plants out of that 1 million square foot expansion. And the smallest building there was our original greenhouse. Now we are in the process of acquiring another company which will bring more growing space into our inventory. And so this is the smaller greenhouse, the 250,000 square foot greenhouse, and the million square foot greenhouse is not built in this picture. I'll show you the inside of that at the end, because if you think you have been in a greenhouse before, going into a cannabis greenhouse of this scale is a bit mind-blowing. And we have purchased with another company in a joint venture a 2 million square foot warehouse in Ontario, in Belleville. This was the old Sears distribution center for Canada. When it was built in the 1980s, it was the largest warehouse in North America. So this is where our extraction and processing will occur. Our joint venture with Molson Coors Canada will produce their beverages here. We hope to combine with other Fortune 500 companies to make edibles, to make cosmetics, and this will be a center of cannabis excellence. And I can tell you, the people in Belleville they love cannabis. They love this company that has come and taken this old warehouse that was sitting there empty, that had formerly hundreds and hundreds of employees, and now we are going in there, we're renovating it. We are going to employ probably 300 people at this facility. I'm speaking to the Belleville Chamber of Commerce in a couple of weeks. The mayor and council have embraced us because these are real jobs in a town of 50 to 55,000 people. This is impactful for them. In our town of Masson-Angers, which has about 2,000 people, we are by far the largest employer now. And our employees are spread all over Gatineau and Ottawa. And you can imagine that having 700 to 800 employees in a community makes a huge difference, not to mention the ways we give back to our community, which I'll talk about in a second. This is our joint venture with Molson Coors Canada. Beverage companies are concerned, rightfully, that people will use less alcohol if they use more cannabis. Because in states that have had legalized cannabis for the last 5 years, Oregon, California, Washington, Colorado, they've seen this substitution effect that alcohol use is tapering off while cannabis use among young people has stayed the same, among older people has gone up a little bit. Not drastically, but significantly, and concurrent use of alcohol has gone down. I think this is a very good thing because of those relative harms that we talked about before. But these companies are worried that this is going to impact their bottom line, so they are getting into the cannabis space. Constellation Brands bought into Canopy, I think $5 billion, Jeremy, was that something like that? Molson Coors Canada and Hexo have come together to form a company called Truss that will make these cannabis-infused beverages. I'll talk about beverages a little bit after, because when it comes to beverages and edibles, start low and go slow, okay? Just remember that and you'll stay out of trouble. Because if you're like the Toronto policeman who raided a dispensary in Toronto and ate all the brownies, they had to call for help. One was in a tree. I'm not kidding, because they overdosed on these edibles because it takes a while to absorb, and so people have more thinking, well, I need more, I'm not feeling this. It can make for a very unpleasant experience. So start low, go slow. If you didn't learn anything else from this today, please remember that. This is the hub and spoke model I talked about. So this, this is a proxy for so many different companies in Canada. You've all probably looked at the stock prices of these companies. Tremendous growth. I mean, Tilray went straight to the NASDAQ, and this was a company that was producing less cannabis than ours. And they went up at one point to $300 US a share. $300 US a share. Their CEO now is the second highest paid executive in the United States. From Nanaimo, British Columbia. This is what I'm passionate about, our corporate social responsibility. Anita mentioned that, this new industry feels an obligation to do things differently. And I think that stems from the fact that so many people worked before many of us in this industry pushing for change to break down the barriers of prohibition so that people could get access for something that helped them, whether it helped them physically or mentally, or replaced other things like alcohol. This was something that people worked on for decades, and many people have criminal records and suffered the negative consequences of prohibition. And also, we understand that our product is something that can be used in a way that can be damaging to people, like alcohol. So we have, again, a responsibility to make sure that we are a net benefit to society. We're not something that is causing an issue or problem for our societies. So for me, corporate social responsibility is really important, and we've broken it down into sort of the 4 Ps: people, public, our products, and planet. Again, as someone who cares a lot about the environment, it's important for me and our company to make sure that the way we produce this plant has the smallest impact on our physical environment as possible. It takes a lot of energy to grow cannabis. We've always heard about grow-ops and stealing power from BC Hydro, and the amount of energy that was required. When you're growing under lamps, that is a significant part of the inputs to growing cannabis. This plant is very thirsty, needs a lot of water. So you look in the United States, it's estimated that something like 2 to 3% of all electricity used in the United States is used to grow cannabis. So we want to make sure that our imprint on the planet is very small. So we grow in greenhouses, which reduces our need for light. We grow in the province of Quebec that has 100% renewable electricity through hydro. We employ technology that reduces our water use, that reduces our heating requirements. And we also support organizations in our area that support the environment, like the Ottawa Riverkeeper, which looks after the big Ottawa basin that we are operating on. Our products, we want to make sure that the quality is there, that people are using it responsibly, to make sure that, again, things like start low and go slow, that people have a good experience with cannabis. We want to make sure young people are well informed about the potential risks of cannabis, but talk to them in a non-fear-based way that's based on science and fact. We want to support our institutions around us. So we support our health foundation. Our biggest, I guess, cause, if you like, are food banks. So everywhere that we operate, we support the food bank, whether it's the Moisson Outaouais in Gatineau or the Ottawa Food Bank. We are combining with those organizations to improve their ability to grow and produce food for people that are having difficulty meeting their needs. and the people. So we want to make sure that we are good employers. All of our employees get options for shares in the company. We have a profit sharing plan with our employees. We have expanded at such a rate that it's been a real challenge to manage our employees. But I'm very proud of the way, when you walk into this company, it's just there's an energy there that is really inspiring. And you know, you could be on the coldest, most miserable Quebec day and walk into a greenhouse and it's summer and everyone is happy and the music's going and everyone is enjoying their work. It's a really neat experience. So what are some of the issues? You know, we know that some communities like Surrey have I would say not a very positive attitude towards cannabis, and that's you know, there are some fears around cannabis. For instance, in Metro Vancouver, they're proposing regulations to control odors. There's no question that if you go into a greenhouse or if you go, you know, if a greenhouse is venting a little bit, you might smell cannabis. It's not the same smell as cannabis that's being smoked. It is the smell of the plant. These are the terpenes, the oils in the plant that every plant produces. So when you walk through a forest and you smell that pine smell, that's pinene. That is a terpene produced by the trees. When you smell cannabis growing, these are the terpenes that are given off by the plant. And it varies by the different strains of cannabis. So one plant will smell one way, another plant will smell another. And for many cannabis enthusiasts, this is extremely important for them in their selection of cannabis. But if you're a neighbor, can it be something that's a bit annoying? It's possible. You know, when I drove down from Kamloops last night and I went through Chilliwack, there was an odor there that I always found a little bit annoying, you know, this time of year. But it's farming, it's agriculture. And whether you're growing lavender or you're growing cannabis, they give off those terpenoids that do have an odor. There are some mechanisms and strategies for reducing odors, and you do have to make sure you are a good neighbor. So we work with our neighboring community to address these issues if they're a concern. But in the Metro Vancouver, they're really treating cannabis differently from other agricultural operations. I mentioned the dairy industry, you know, the spreading of manure. People support that's agriculture and you have a right to farm. Well, growing a plant in a greenhouse is agriculture. And I really think it's objectionable that some governments are treating it as if it isn't agriculture. People are worried about, you know, displacement of food production. But I mean, if you go to Costco, there is a lot of produce there that is grown here in BC. But there's a whole ton that's grown in Mexico and South America, Guatemala. You know, so this is not an issue about displacing food. And in fact, the amount of cannabis that you could grow for the market here would only be about maybe 5% of the greenhouse space that is currently available in the Lower Mainland. In terms of the distance from other businesses, then yeah, you know, you have to think about these things. But again, I think a lot of this is based on stigma rather than actually knowing cannabis. When we get people touring our facility, they come out with a much different idea about cannabis production than they had before they went in. So I would encourage you, if you can, to tour some of these facilities. I saw in the Metro Vancouver discussion, they were saying, well, you know, these greenhouses and these plants produce volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, and these contribute to ground level ozone, which in the Fraser Valley is a concern, ground level ozone. But every flower produces volatile organic compounds. Anyone have an infuser that they use at home? You know, nice mist that, what the stuff you put in there, they produce volatile organic compounds. They're all around us. And so I think, you know, this is a way of kind of the bureaucracy sensing the political climate and trying to make the science fit the policy rather than going from the science and creating policy. But is it an issue? Perhaps, and we have to manage these things. Light is an issue, so we work with our community again to make sure that we are using our, you know, our shades so that we don't have this great beam of light keeping people awake at night. Around the Agricultural Land Reserve, when Steph and I were in government, we declared cannabis cultivation is an approved use under the Agricultural Land Reserve. It's agriculture. Now there are changes to the ALC regulations that clarify that cannabis cultivation is in fact farming, but local governments can ban cannabis use unless there was an existing greenhouse there. You know, they say it can't have a concrete floor, it has to be soil-based. So what's the difference? You know, like food production is different than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. And local governments can also ban outdoor growing as well. So it does allow local governments to be more restrictive. And again, this is quite different than in other parts of Canada. I wanted to show you, this is our 1 million square foot greenhouse, and you know, this is on the main road through our community that comes off the ferry from the river. You can see here, these are the young plants that are right on the floor, and that floor gets flooded to make sure the plants get saturated. That's all computerized when that occurs. You can see the fans there that make sure the air is being distributed evenly. Everyone is, you know, donning netting and lab coats. This is an like I've toured pharmacy factories that don't have this level of sophistication and this level of regulation and cleanliness. It is a completely different way of growing cannabis than many of us had imagined. These trays that these plants sit on all capture water, and then that's recirculated and reused so that we're not wasting water. You can see those plastic pipes that are hanging there. That's hot water going through those, and they can be lowered or raised to provide the plants with more or less heat depending on the temperature in the greenhouse. Again, that helps reduce the amount of heating that we have to use through natural gas. We have robotic carts that will go on a track through this greenhouse so that it can deliver things to various parts of the greenhouse, again, based on computerization. Each of those plants has a mini drip in it that provides water and fertilizer to the plant based on need, again, all computerized. The light system is all set up so that those plants receive the right amount of light each day. If they're in the vegetative phase, that's when they aren't producing flowers, they're just trying to grow. They get light 18 hours a day, and then you trick them into thinking that fall is coming by cutting that light to 12 hours a day, and they think fall is coming, so we better produce some seeds, so they start flowering. These are all female plants, so they never get pollinated, so they don't produce seeds, but they produce beautiful flowers after you cut down the light to make them think that it's fall. So it really is a science, and you can see, you know, it is clean, it's high tech, it's developing all kinds of opportunities in communities. Again, we've got about, in this particular greenhouse, we probably have about 200 people that work in this greenhouse and about 500 that work on that campus, and then with Belleville, Montreal, and now we're acquiring another company in Brampton and Niagara. There's a lot of people that are benefiting from the cultivation of cannabis. I am going to leave it there because I think what's important is to hear what you're interested in and see if there are any questions that I can answer for you, any areas that we haven't discussed. But thank you very much for your attention this morning and for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you do have a question, we have a microphone in the audience. Please state your name, your company name, and your question very succinctly. We are recording today's session as well. And so while you're approaching the podium, I just have a couple of questions for you, Terry. So what is the lost economic opportunity to cities that are not embracing retail cannabis stores? What is the opportunity, second part, for international trade for Canada as well?
Good questions. I think communities that opt out of cannabis or are not cannabis friendly first of all, they're making an assumption that their constituents, don't want that business in their community, and I think they are misreading the constituency because of preconceived notions. So those people are going to get cannabis somewhere. So if you're in Surrey and you can't get cannabis, well, you're going to go to Burnaby or you're going to go to Vancouver. You're going to buy it if you want it, and so that money goes out of your community. We all know that small business is the backbone of the Canadian economy. And, I know people in Kamloops, restaurant owners that now are getting into cannabis retailing. They're hiring more people. People that, and I think one thing that we're proud of as an industry is we've taken people that were in the industry before and brought them into the new industry. So, participating in the so-called illegal industry before hasn't been a barrier for most people to get into the business today. And I think that is a very positive thing and positive for communities. These are businesses that, as I said, employ people, provide a product that people want. They give back to their community because many people in the cannabis industry are very socially aware, socially conscious, socially responsible. They want to give back. And I just think that it also does not allow you to have that level of control. I always thought as a councillor and as a mayor that local governments should have the ability to control the look and feel of their community. But if people are getting it somewhere else, you've lost the opportunity, and you could still bring that opportunity back in a way that reflects your community. So it can be done. I'm proud that in the city of Kamloops, they've done that, and I walked through my thoughts with them on a number of occasions. And, they had the first store in British Columbia. They now have some private stores opening. And, the world hasn't ended. There's not a lot of zombies walking around the streets of Kamloops. It really hasn't changed. What you do see are people like me going into the cannabis store. And you hear these stories all the time. Oh, my mom wanted me to go and get her cannabis. It is phenomenal. It just really has changed. Internationally, there's a lot of, again, hype around the international space. I just came back from Denmark, where they are starting a very limited medical cannabis program. Germany has probably the most widespread medical cannabis program in Europe. But again, there's only something like 20 to 25,000 patients. People think that it will go adult use recreation eventually. I can't see how it won't happen. It may take longer in some parts of the world than others, but you kind of see where the world is going, and it's just a matter of time. In the United States, it's just a matter of time before the whole country has legalized access to cannabis. But I think it will take some time. But that gives us the opportunities, Canadian companies, to get out there, provide the expertise. Like most of the action in Europe on the medical space is Canadian companies going over there and forming joint ventures or partnerships with companies there. And we have that opportunity eventually in the United States. There will be some consolidation, and we will have big companies buying companies like ours perhaps at some point. But I think we have an opportunity as Canadians to be leaders in this field around the world.
And I just wanted to comment in the video that you showed on screen, the innovation, the technology, the use of growing through, maybe in the future, artificial intelligence, AI,
Absolutely.
all of that.
Yeah, I mean, this plant and the production of the products from this plant really lend itself to all kinds of innovation. And again, I think that's the runway that Canada has ahead of many other countries, that we can be leaders in that. You look at, we're looking at using a biomass plant to replace the natural gas that we use. We could cut our greenhouse gases by something like 30 tons a year by replacing natural gas with biomass. So we're taking a hard look at that and the technology available. Technology for capturing carbon dioxide out of the air. We give our plants carbon dioxide to stimulate growth, but we have to buy it from another supplier. If we could capture it from the air around us, we'd be taking it out of the atmosphere, which is a good thing, and putting it into our plants that need it. So all kinds of technology will develop. Sure. Good morning.
Hi, morning. Thank you for sharing with us, Dr. Lake. I might have a few questions a bit later. I'm Ron from the Sunder Group, and I just had one question to start with. And what I wanted to know was, what does Hexo use as a growing medium, as a substrate for its hydroponics?
Well, we have used different media from time to time. When I got there, we were using a coconut product from India. We've switched now over to more of a soil-based product. Again, with the innovation, we look at different things, and we see how the yield is on this particular product versus that, and our master growers make those decisions along with our chief operating officer. But again, it varies depending on, it may be one type of product in one greenhouse and another product in another, and compare the two.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning. My name is Sir Jupil. I'm with a company called Micron Waste Technologies. First of all, good on you for taking the corporate social responsibility lead. Typically, that's been reserved for more established brands that are looking to separate themselves. But to get in on such a young industry is fantastic. So my question for you was, given the Farm Bill in the U.S. And the impending hemp production that's going to just take over the U.S., what is HEXO's plan to get involved in on the U.S. front?
Right. So what our speaker is referring to is the Farm Bill in the United States has basically, although we still don't know all of the implications of it yet, but in a broad sense, it is saying to hemp producers, you can now use hemp to produce CBD, that non-high cannabinoid that has a lot of positive benefits. And that will create all kinds of opportunities for growing hemp in not just the United States, but we've changed the regulations here in Canada. So we, in fact, have partnered with a hemp grower in southern Alberta. And I visited them in the middle of winter last year, which isn't a great time to go to southern Alberta, by the way. But amazingly, southern Alberta is one of the best places to grow hemp. Just, it doesn't seem like it would be, but they have sugar beets down there, and so this is in the same area. So this is going to be sort of de-link CBD from cannabis in many ways. And even in Europe, you're seeing this now. They're looking at CBD as what they call a novel food, and the EU is trying to figure out regulations. CBD in food products, CBD in cosmetics, CBD in beverages. And so it will be almost like a natural health product. And that's what I think we're going to see in the United States. Already, there's tons of CBD business in the U.S. It's just been kind of in that gray zone, and I think the Farm Bill will provide clarity across the United States about how CBD is treated. So you may see a bit of a delinking of cannabis and CBD, although, as I mentioned before, the combination of THC and CBD together have a different effect than either one of them alone. So it's not quite as simple as just having two different molecules.
Okay, and on a somewhat of a selfish front, I work for a clean biotech company in Vancouver, so if you guys are looking for a responsible waste management, cannabis waste management solution, we got one for you.
Well, it's something that all of us are interested in. Right now, Health Canada says we have to compost all of the stems and the big leaves that aren't used in the product. And it's unfortunate because I think the stems, for instance, could be used for fiber reinforcement of concrete, of hardy plank, of different products. And the leaves could be made into animal feed. There's no THC in these big leaves. They could be put into animal feed. So we are hoping that they'll allow us to do a little bit of research and find better ways of managing the waste, because it is a concern for all of us. Thanks
very much.
Jeremy.
Yes, my name is Jeremy Jacob. I'm the president of Acres, which is proud to sponsor this event today, and thank you, Surrey Board of Trade, for inviting us to sponsor. Thank you, Terry, for coming down to speak. My question is around economic development. So obviously, BC has a historic place in cannabis cultivation. Cannabis is a significant economic driver in this province, regulated or not. I know from talking to colleagues in this space that, for example, Aurora, when they were forming and when they were looking for a head office, tried to locate in BC. The climate at the time, the regulations that were in place didn't allow them to find a home here. You mentioned that HEXO's roots are in Kamloops, yet they're focused in Quebec and Ontario now. Were there regulations or a lack of regulations in BC at the time that prompted that move from Kamloops to Quebec? And what is it that BC communities need to do to promote economic development within the province?
Well, thanks, Jeremy. Well, the Kamloops connection was simply that Adam Miron and I, we're in Kamloops and we work together on in politics. But then Adam moved to Ottawa, and before he got into the cannabis space, he was doing other things. He was executive director for the Young Liberals of Canada. He formed Canada's most popular online political newspaper, iPolitics. That was him co-founding that as well. So the only Kamloops connection really is that we were both from there, but they found this opportunity in Gatineau because the original owner of this property where we sit had a nursery, and he was in the middle of exploring a medical cannabis license. And as Adam and his brother-in-law, Sebastian, our CEO, were exploring this with the city of Gatineau, they said, hey, there's a guy down the road that's doing the same thing. So they just got together. So it was kind of serendipity in many ways. But again, the city of Gatineau encouraged them, right? They said, oh, hey, there's a guy over here. Why don't you guys talk together? And the mayor of Gatineau, great supporter of our industry. The MLA, the MP, they're all huge supporters of our company because we create a bunch of jobs that wouldn't be there otherwise. We give back. When the tornadoes hit Gatineau and Ottawa last fall, we gave $25,000 to the Red Cross. We just did it. You didn't talk about it. We just did it. With the flood relief, we just gave $10,000 for flood relief. We have employees that were affected. We created a fund to help those employees that were affected. Again, food banks, environmental organizations. So these are great community partners. Why would you not want a company like that to be working in your community? Not only creating economic development, but providing a social good as well. It's all about your attitude. People have these, whether you're sort of more conservative-minded, but people have attitudes in government sometimes. Let's face it, governments are often run by older white guys, right? And so there's a bit of a preconceived notion about some of these things on the part of that part of the population. I was like that too. So you just need to open up people's eyes to the possibility, which is why I'm really thankful for the Surrey Board of Trade to have this discussion. I had this same discussion with the Ottawa Board of Trade, and people were just fascinated. And they said, until I heard about the way you're operating, I was against cannabis legalization. Now we wanted to know, what companies to invest in. So I think you just have to change minds and hearts, Jeremy. You've been doing that for years in Vancouver. And now it's just on a grander scale across the country, but I think it's happening.
Yes.
Steph. Minister.
Oh, give me a break. Terry. So Terry, tell us, did government get the taxation model right? Are we going to see the black market disappear and the legal market take over?
It's a very good question, because if you look at the experience in Washington State, and my mother-in-law lives in Bellingham, so we go down there quite a bit, so it's been interesting to see the transition down there. And by the way, when I went into the cannabis store last time I was in Bellingham, they wouldn't let me in because I didn't have my passport. I couldn't prove I was over 21. My daughters all got in, but they wouldn't let me in. Yeah. But in Washington State, what they did was they didn't think about the impact of taxation, so they had tax upon tax upon tax. Governments always look at the opportunity for revenue generation, obviously, but they got it wrong in Washington State. And after 2 or 3 years, they realized that they weren't really out-competing the black market. And so they reduced taxation. And sure enough, you saw that market change. There's still probably 20 to 22% black market in Washington State, but after 5 or 6 years, that's not bad. It's not going to change overnight. So have we got it right? Well, no, we haven't got it right, because our product is subject to a number of different taxes. We've got an excise tax. We've got obviously sales taxes when it hits the store. We've got a tax created by different provincial governments, and it does vary across the country. And we've got what's called a regulatory recovery fee. We're the only industry that I know of with a regulatory recovery fee. 2.3% of all of our revenue has to go straight back to Health Canada to pay for the infrastructure to regulate the industry. And that doesn't matter whether you have any issues with regulation or you're a constant offender. You get the same rate. So what that means is that the product is priced too high at the moment. You can get cannabis for Jeremy on the street, probably $6 a gram-ish. Probably in Vancouver, you can get it for about $6. And if you go to a store, you're going to average probably $10 or $11 a gram. Well, Canadians are law-abiding people, so most people are willing to pay a premium for the legal product, but they're not willing to pay double. And so we really have to keep an eye on that if we are going. And we have to make sure we keep our costs down so that we can provide the product at a price that does outcompete the black market.
Terry, the Surrey Board of Trade, we were the only Board of Trade Chamber of Commerce that asked Bill Blair, and we wrote a policy paper on it, to include business in the discussion about cannabis in the workplace. And our specific asks were, within the framework of cannabis legalization, to include business because of mitigation strategies, operating machinery, all of those pieces. And so do you think now, as we approach 5 months of the anniversary of legalization, from your perspective, what is the impact on the workplace?
I have always been of the view that the impact on the workplace is no different than it was before legalization. Because if you have to be fit for work, no matter what you're taking, whether it's alcohol, whether it's prescription drugs, or whether it's cannabis, you have to be fit for work. You have to make accommodations for people that are on medical cannabis, but we had to do that before. So there's no reason to think that because cannabis is legal, people are going to show up high any more than they did before, because we've seen the use hasn't changed that much. If people were getting high and going to work, they were doing that before legalization, and maybe they're still doing it now, but it's at least provoked a conversation so that in workplaces across Canada, HR departments are updating their manuals to reflect the new situation. They're saying whether or not is cannabis available at social events where alcohol might be available, so they're adjusting things that way. But really what it's done is it sparked a conversation about cannabis use in the workplace that was happening before, but now at least we are talking about it and people can clarify positions. But I work in an environment where we have a lot of medical cannabis users on our staff. So it's kind of interesting. Sometimes you'll go outside and you'll see people that are smoking on their smoke break, and you'll see other people that are using their medication, smoking cannabis. Kind of weird to get your head around it, but you know what? These folks that are on medical cannabis, without that, they can't function at the high level that they do function. It is, for many, many people, it is the difference between having a fully functional, productive life and dealing with chronic pain issues or other issues and not being able to fully participate in the workforce. But I do think every company should have a conversation about this, for sure.
Any other questions from the audience? So just my final question to you, because you're on the campaign trail now for the federal election. And again, we're the only Board of Trade chamber that's advocating for a universal pharmacare program, not a fill-in-the-gaps model. And do you think a universal pharmacare program will help, the use of medical marijuana for those patients that need it and access to it cost?
Yeah, that is a tough one. As a former health minister, I dealt with the issue. And the problem is our prescription drug system, the approval system, is based on single molecules for the most part. So, ibuprofen, it's a single molecule, that, it does this in the vast majority of cases. It has this effect. You can do clinical trials easily. It's one molecule. You can blind the study. You can separate out conflating or confounding factors. Much easier. Cannabis is a complex plant of over 150 different cannabinoids and terpenes and other things we don't even understand. And so creating a prescription drug in the sort of Western view that we've had, the drug identification number approval process, is very difficult with cannabis. We do have some cannabis products that are prescription, pure CBD or pure THC, and some synthetic forms of THC as well that have gone through that process. But they are different than the whole plant and some of the extracts that we see. So national pharmacare, I don't think we all fully understand the ramifications of national pharmacare yet, but I think The ideal of having medication available for everyone who needs it without worrying about what it's going to cost is a great thing. But I will say this, that excise tax on people's medication is absolutely abhorrent to me. So if you are a medically authorized cannabis user, you are now paying an excise tax on your medication. And I've talked to so many people. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in Quebec City, a person with multiple sclerosis. She said, I left 7 different drugs because I started using cannabis and it managed my symptoms far better than those 7 different drugs. Well, how much is the system saving from the cost of those drugs? And yet she has to pay for her own cannabis. Some companies, some extended healthcare companies are now covering for some conditions. I think we will expand that. I think I hope that we will see medical cannabis move into pharmacies, so pharmacists are working with patients. As that happens, I think we will get a better medical system, and at that point, we better see that excise tax come off because it doesn't make sense to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Dr. Terry Lake. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Terry. Well, we have a lot to learn, don't we? And it's going to be an ongoing journey as it relates to cannabis in Canada, in our province, and in our cities. Before you leave this morning, I just wanted to remind you of a couple of Surrey Board of Trade events. On Thursday, May 30th, next week, join us for a business workshop entitled Bringing Mental Health Education into the Workplace. On May 31st, join us for our second Surrey Entrepreneur Morning Showcase Series. Learn from leading entrepreneurs in Surrey on what worked and what didn't for them. And join us on June 4th for our Surrey Hot Topic Dialogue on the Fraser River, untapped potential for economic development. And I also wanted to mention on June 14th, join us for our 3rd annual Surrey Art and Business Awards. Thank you again to our sponsors, our community sponsor, the Association of Canadian Association Cannabis Retailers, otherwise known as ACRES, marketing partner Niche Canada, and of course our media sponsor, the Surrey Now Leader, our venue sponsor, Eagle Quest Golf Course. Ladies and gentlemen, make it a great business day.